The Omnivores Dilemma, Chapter 18, pages 237 to 245. Page 237, The Forest, Survivor Food. There was one more meal I wanted to make. It was the meal at the end of the shortest food chain of all. What I had in mind was a dinner made entirely from foods I had hunted, gathered, and grown myself. Now, there are some people in the world, not many anymore, who make that sort of meal 3 times a day. I am not one of them. The growing part was the only part I knew I could handle. I've been a gardener most of my life and have made countless meals from my garden. That left hunting and gathering. I have never hunted in my life. Indeed, I had never fired a gun, unless you count cap pistols. I've always thought of myself as pretty clumsy. Walking around with a loaded gun never seemed like a good idea. Thanks to my mother, I did have some childhood experiences as a gatherer. During the summer, she would take us to the beach at low tide to dig for clams. We'd walk along the sand, looking for the air holes the clams made. Then we'd dig them up until they squirted us in self-defense. At the end of the summer, we would pick beach plums that would make into a delicious jelly the color of rubies. All winter long, her beach plum jelly brought back memories of summer vacation, August on toast. What I most remember from these early foraging, food gathering trips were the scary warnings from my mother. Some mushrooms and berries have poisons in them, and she made sure I knew exactly how terrible it would be to eat one of them. When she was done, I thought eating wild mushrooms was as dangerous as touching a downed power line. As a result, I only gathered fruits I absolutely knew, like blueberries, and I never ever touched a wild mushroom. But I was determined to have wild mushrooms on the menu of my do-it-yourself meal. I think that's because mushroom hunting seems to be a perfect example of the omnivore's dilemma. Is that mushroom good food, or is it poison? I'd have to learn to tell the difference. Page 239, The First Food Chain. Why go to all this trouble? It's not as though we can bring back hunting and gathering as a way of life for most people. There's just not enough wild game and fruit to feed everyone. Of course, we did go back to the way of life. Some of us might really enjoy it. Ancient hunter-gatherers worked much less than the modern-day humans. It took them about 17 hours a week to hunt and gather enough food for them and their families. Compare that to the 40-hour or more work week we have today. And you'll be surprised to learn that hunter-gatherers ate better, grew taller, lived longer, and were healthier than civilized people. It's only in the last century that modern society has been able to match the health of its hunter-gatherer ancestors. But whether we'd like it or not, we are clearly not returning to those days. So why did I want to make this last meal? Because it was as close as I could get to the original food chain? The way people fed themselves for the tens of thousands of years before agriculture? It is the food chain we evolved to be part of. I thought this meal might take me back to a time when the omnivore's dilemma wasn't as complicated, when we had more direct connection with our food. It would give me a chance to look at the omnivore's dilemma in a new, or rather old, light. It has often struck me that even though modern Americans don't ever need to grow, hunt, or gather our own food, a lot of us still do. We garden, we hunt, we pick wild mushrooms or berries. Even if all you can do is grow a few tomatoes in your backyard, and even if those tomatoes end up costing twice as much as the ones you buy in the supermarket, you do it anyway. Why? I think it's an effort to be connected once again to our food. We don't want to be passive consumers, sitting at the end of a food chain, eating what we are served. My meal would be an extreme experiment in being an active and conscious eater. I have been part of 3 different food systems: industrial, industrial organic, and beyond organic. Now, I was going to be the food system. There would be nothing between me and my food from start to finish. Page 240, Pollen the Hunter. I have to confess that there was more behind my desire to go hunting. Hunting is one of those skills that the all-American boy is supposed to have, at least in some parts of the country. Even the writer and philosopher Henry David Thoreau said so. We cannot but pity the boy who has never fired a gun, he wrote in his famous book, Walden. This idea had always annoyed me. Was I less of a boy or man because I had never been hunting? Now, I was finally going to hunt, yet deciding to hunt was one thing and doing it was another. How was I going to learn to fire a gun, let alone hunt? Did I need a license? What if I actually managed to kill something? Then what? How do you dress an animal you've killed? Dress is the word used to skin and gut an animal. A pretty weird choice of words when you think about it. And what about those killer wild mushrooms? Would I be able to learn enough to overcome my fear of eating them? What I badly needed, I realized, was a kind of hunter-gatherer tutor. I needed someone skilled in the arts of hunting and gathering, who also knew a lot about animals, plants, and fungi of Northern California. Oh yes, I forgot to mention that. On the eve of this experiment, I had just moved to Northern California, far away from the New England woods and fields I knew. I was going to have to learn to hunt and gather and garden on what amounted to a different planet full of animals and plants I didn't know. What did people hunt here anyway? And when did they hunt it? What time of year do the mushrooms mushroom around here, or where? I had to learn. I had a lot to learn. Page 242, My Foraging Guide. As luck would have it, a perfect tutor appeared in my life at exactly the right moment. Angelo Garo is a stout, burly Italian with a 5-day beard, sleepy brown eyes, and a passion about getting and preparing food. Shortly after we moved to California, I started running into Angelo. We'd be invited to a dinner party, and there would be Angelo among the guests. Only unlike the other guests, Angelo always had some story to tell about the meal. Maybe he had gotten the halibut from a fishing boat that morning, or he had picked the fennel along the highway on the drive over, or he'd made the wine or the ham himself. And unlike the other guests, Angelo always wound up in the kitchen cooking the dinner or passing the platters of his famous fennel cakes. Meanwhile, he would explain the proper way to make pasta or salami or balsamic vinegar. Hint, for the last one, you need at least 10 or 12 years and the right kind of barrels. The guy was a one-man traveling food network. After a few of these dinners, I began to piece together Angelo's story. He's a 58-year-old Sicilian who left home at 18, following a girl to Canada. 20 years later, he followed a different girl to San Francisco, where he has lived ever since. He makes his living forging wrought iron items like garden gates and fences, railing, stairs, and fireplace tools. He lives in a forge that has been a blacksmith shop since the time of the California Gold Rush in 1849. Yet his consuming passion is food. He seems driven to recapture the flavors of his childhood back in Sicily. A successful dish, he will say, is one that tastes like my mother. Several months after I met Angelo, he appeared again, this time, strangely enough, on my car radio. He was being interviewed on public radio for a story about foraging. The reporter followed Angelo on a porcini mushroom hunt and then into a duck blind at dawn. While he waited for the sun and the ducks to rise, Angelo spoke in a whisper about his past and his passions. In Sicily, I could tell by the smell of what time of year it was, he said. Orange season, oranges, persimmons, olives, and olive oil. I have the passions of foraging, passion of hunting, opera. My work, he told the reporter, I have the passion of cooking, pickling, curing salamis, sausage, making wine in the fall. This is my life. I do this with my friends. It's to my heart. Even before the radio segment ended, I knew I had found my guide. The next time I bumped into Angelo, I asked him if I could tag along on his next foraging trip. Sure, okay. We go hunt chanterelle in Sonoma. I call you when it's time. Feeling bolder, I asked him about going hunting too. Okay, we could hunt one day, maybe some duck, maybe the pig. But first, you need a license and learn to shoot. The pig? Clearly, there was even more to learn than I had thought. Page 244, Hunting for Dummies. It took me a couple of months to sort out the rules for getting a hunter's license. They involved taking a hunter education course and taking a test. It seems they'll sell a high-powered rifle to just about anybody in California. But it's against the law to aim the thing at an animal without a 14-hour class and a multiple-choice exam. The next class was on a Saturday 2 months off. Once I knew I would be going hunting and gathering, something strange happened. I started looking for food everywhere I went. Suddenly, a walk in the woods wasn't just a walk. It was now a search for supper. Woody Allen once said as a joke that nature is an enormous restaurant. Maybe he was right. I started dividing everything I saw into two groups. Some things were probably good to eat, others were not. Of course, in most cases, I had no real idea which was which. Still, I began to notice things. I noticed the soft yellow globes of chamomile flowers on the path I hiked most afternoons. They're used to make chamomile tea. I spotted clumps of miner's lettuce off in the shade. That's a tasty green I had once grown in my Connecticut garden. And there was a wild mustard, another green, growing out in the sun. There were blackberries in flower. I even saw some wild birds that were good to eat, a few quail, a pair of doves. I began looking at field guides to help me identify all the different unfamiliar species. Okay, maybe I went a little overboard. You don't really want to turn nature into a big restaurant, but looking for food did change the way I looked at nature. It made me look more closely at everything. It made me pay attention in a way I hadn't in years.